Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's lesson in the course of world history. I am Mr. Samuelson, and today we are looking at how Islam saved the West. Yes, Western culture was preserved through a lot of the efforts of the Islamic Empire. Let's look at how that happened. Our essential question: what role did Islam serve in preserving Western history? Let's dig in. Starting with European decline, right? The Dark Ages. It was bad. This medieval period, it's not a period that is seen as a great stretch of European achievement. Europe was not accomplishing a whole heck of a lot. Now, to say that they weren't doing anything would be a stretch. Certainly a lot happened in Europe during this time, but the rest of the world was seeing much greater accomplishments. So historians frequently mark this period as the Dark Ages of Europe. Through this period, Europe had not regained the population, the wealth, the cultural impact that had flourished under the Roman Empire. Europe was, in comparison, from 622 to 1250 AD, the Islamic Empire, the Islamic world, was in a relative golden age. Not to say that they didn't have some setbacks. They definitely had some setbacks. But for the most part, we're looking at a 600-year period where Islam is expanding, it's thriving. Internally, it's mostly at peace. It does have some problems. All empires do over a 600-year stretch. But this was a period of Islamic thrival and cultural expansion. Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba became these cultural centers, these centers of learning. And outside of China were really the premier cities in the world at this time. The Islamic military during this 600-year stretch, Islam faced only temporary challenges to their expansion. They really rolled over most of their opposition. The few exceptions to this do include the Battle of Tours, right in here, that kept the Islamic Empire from really reaching into the heart of Europe, though they did get Spain. The First Crusade, which was a setback in the Middle East, although they overcame it. And then the frequent failed attempts on Constantinople to try to break into Europe from the east. But apart from this, the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, Spain, the entire Persian Empire, pushing all the way to the Indus River, Islam was booming. The sciences were really thriving. Muslim scientists were using experimentation in a way that the Europeans would not figure out for hundreds of years still. Through this experimentation and careful observation, Muslims had a much better understanding of astronomy, of medicine, of biology than Europeans ever could. The scientific process was underway within the Islamic Empire, which is why their arts and sciences far, far, far outstripped those in Europe during this time. Islamic philosophy. Now, for here, we want to jump back to the ancient Greeks and delve a little bit in Western philosophy because the Greeks really got a hold of this first. And they spread their philosophical teachings throughout this Greek empire. The Greek Empire was at one point huge, and it was kind of incorporated by Byzantines and then totally taken over by Islam. So all this Greek philosophy, this Greek thought, became incorporated in the Islamic Empire, and Muslims studied these philosophies. They built on the learnings of these philosophers, and they established schools to expand the mind and to expand thought. The best known was one in Cordoba in Spain, which really led the reintroduction of philosophy and philosophic thinking into Europe. It had been lost in the Dark Ages, and through contact with Muslim scholars in Spain, slowly gets reintroduced. Now, Cordoba, in particular in Spain, became the center of learning for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Because let's not forget that the Islamic Empire initially was known as a place of relative religious tolerance. There was not persecution of Christians and Jews. Yes, they had to pay a fine, and there were certain limitations on their actions, particularly in a military sense. But Christians and Jews could freely practice alongside Muslims. And that meant they could also learn alongside Muslims and learn from Muslim scholars. So in Cordoba, right here, we have this wonderful mixing of cultures and knowledge. And any pilgrims to Spain were exposed to science and philosophy. There are some important Christian shrines in Spain, and a lot of Christians would travel there to visit these shrines and would mix and interact with Islamic scholars in Cordoba. In addition to this, crusaders in the 12th and 13th century, those who were going off to holy war, would also be going into Muslim-held lands and learning from Muslims and bringing back a lot of knowledge that had been lost to the West. Now, the Byzantines helped out with this too. It was not just the Islamic Empire that served as this well of ancient knowledge. The Byzantine Empire had gathered a lot of Roman in particular, but also Greek learning and documents. But the Byzantines focused less on education and the spread of knowledge than Islamic Empire had. They weren't as big on spreading and teaching all this stuff, but they did collect a lot of it. And the city of Constantinople had libraries filled with these texts. So when crusaders in the Fourth Crusade take a little detour from their religious war and decide to sack Constantinople instead, more on that later, they do rediscover all of this ancient Roman and ancient Greek knowledge. And they kind of loot these libraries and these wells of documents and bring a lot of that back to Europe. All right, so that was it for today. The role of Islam in preserving and expanding Western knowledge. I hope you learned something. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Farewell.